and shine. So you were going to give your CV, as it were.
Yeah. Hey, fellas. So, yeah, thanks for your time, the invite today. Appreciate that. So, did a little over 20 years in the Navy as a fighter pilot and then a test pilot. Actually started in the S3, a Lockheed product before it was Lockheed Martin. So, combat deployments, aircraft carriers ×4 into Iraq and Afghanistan. So, did some work over there to help out. Close air support was the kind of crowning achievement for the F-18 at the time, because there was not a lot of air superiority required. In other words, we already owned the skies. Got to do that, and then went off to test pilots. Actually went and taught the Naval Academy, to Rob's earlier comment, with aerospace engineering. So got to teach the mids there, bore them a little bit with Bernoulli, and then when their eyes glazed over, I'd show them combat footage of something blowing up and explain why it's blowing up, how it's blowing up. And so kind of became a cheerleader for naval aviation, as well as an aero instructor for a little bit, and then went off to Air Force test pilot school. So I was a Navy exchange pilot. Flew about a little over 30 different types of aircraft, to include helos, gliders, cargo, and then, a lot of their fighters, F-15, F-16, all that stuff. I was too old in the program to try F-22s. What I mean by that is the F-22 hadn't been introduced into we call it handling quality syllabus, into the show and tell syllabus until after I left. So didn't get to fly the Raptor, unfortunately, nor the JSF. From there, went off, did a lot of weapons testing. I focused on air to surface stuff, specifically anti-ship. And then we do something called Link 16, which is like a giant Wi-Fi, right? That's airborne and ground-based now. And these weapons would dial into the Wi-Fi so we could update the target coordinates as it's running down range, which is huge if it's a longer range weapon, right? So mid-course, we can adjust it so it flies efficiently to the target, at least to the sensor basket where it opens its eye, whatever its eye may be, RF or EO or IR, and then find the target. Did that, and then went down to the depot in San Diego, which is where they reworked the old broken Hornets, and my job was to test them and make sure they worked. They usually worked, not all the time, so I have some stories there. My wife kind of got enough gray hair. She's like, hey, let's stop this craziness. And so the Navy said, well, you can go fly a desk in Pax River, which is where the engineers go. And we were in San Diego at the time, my wife's hometown. So she said, why don't we just settle down here? So we did. So we finished up, once again, a little over 20 years in the Navy. And then I've been consulting for the Navy now with some advanced weapons like hypersonics, still working pretty much air-launched anti-ship weapons, specifically partnering with Raytheon, something called HALO that was canceled, a hypersonic air-launched OASU, which is offensive anti-ship weapon. And then Lockheed Martin.
Acronym in an acronym. I like it.
What's that?
I'm sorry, acronym in an acronym.
I know,
I like
nested.
it. Yeah.
I know, we have nested acronyms. It's terrible. Anyway, right now let me just say this. Sorry, I work with the OEMs, so the Lockheeds, the Raytheons. Anduril now is coming on board too, which is kind of nice. And then I work with the Top Gun tacticians, and then I work with the NavAir engineers. So I try to fuse all the viewpoints together and make sure everyone's speaking the same language. So that's me. And then met Rob and Roger through the Fighter Pilot podcast. So Coalition of Willing there way back in the day, and now they've got this awesome authentic media. So thanks for inviting me.
Very impressive.
Thanks Joe. So
all right, so being a good steward of everyone's time, Rob, if there's nothing else, because we're about to hear Joe and Nelson's bios here in the intro. Yep. not to not want to hear them, but we're going to hear them on air. Rob, quick I guess production level question. Your hook, are you putting video over that with audio of that, or are you wanting me to describe that? The roar of the J-57 and the saber dance.
Oh, so number one, this is a guide, right? So,
right.
But I think I think the roar of it and it would be great. So
okay,
so that's just the idea behind it. But yeah,
okay. So we'll find it, and I'm not going to talk through it. The magic of editing, right? I'm going to jump in after that. Okay. Yep. Any questions? Anything before we get going?
No, we're ready to go, I think. Nelson, I think you're good, right, sir?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, cool beans. So I guess just to, from our standpoint, obviously it's Grinnelli Designs, but it's bigger than Grinnelli for sure. Mm-hmm. Everything that we do is not possible by one individual. And myself, I guess just as far as in the questioning, certain things I definitely, I mean, both of us can pretty much handle. Obviously, I was the guy, boots on the ground, doing a lot of the research in America. Nelson is obviously in the UK. So to get him over here, I'm trying to get him over here to get him inside the Collings F and that sort of thing. So a lot of that is my expertise, or at least it's my experience. So I can speak directly to a lot of the stuff in the guide or the outline here. Nelson is, well, I'll let him speak for himself, but just briefly, Nelson is one of the best in the business when it comes to DCS programming. Physics guy, a programming expert, and I would say that Nelson has the lead programming role in the F100. We all do, myself, Nelson, and Brandon, who's not with us. Unfortunately, I wanted to have Brandon with us. He was traveling to see family. He's a naval aviator currently, flying Super Hornets right now. He just got his wings.
Nice.
So he handles all the aerodynamics and stuff. So Nelson is going to surrogate a lot of the information that would have come from Brandon, and I will do my best to.
Brandon's the true expert behind how the Hun flies in DCS, though. It's quite incredible.
Fantastic. Does Brandon want to go to test pilot school?
Brandon, from what I know, I've been friends with Brandon now for a while, and I know his dream was to get inside the Growlers. And the squadron, he did get assigned to a really nice squadron. It escapes me off the top of my head right now, but he was happy the squadron that he got. And I've never known anyone that got single seat fighters that was I don't want to say disappointed, but you know, he really wanted to fly with somebody else. He wanted to have that 2-seat Growler, but you know, I knew from day one when he told me he was going in that he was going to get fighter pilots. He's another brilliant guy, and you know, we're just happy to be here, and we appreciate you guys putting a light on what we're trying to do, and hopefully we have some intelligent, you know, quality answers and information that we could add to the overall story here.
Oh, I'm sure you will. Yeah, I'm excited to learn. Hey, sorry, production question here. So, you know, clipping out this. So is this a video? Is this mass consumption is video or audio, please?
Yes.
Okay. Is there an opportunity
do both.
for cameras?
Yep.
What's that?
Yes.
So like Joe and Nelson, is it worth turning on your cameras, or is that?
I personally don't have anything.
Okay.
USB.
I
no
don't
worries.
have a webcam either, I'm afraid.
Okay, no worries.
That's okay. No worries.
We'll get like footage and, you know, releasable footage and stills for when it's appropriate.
I could easily get you a still, and if needed, I can get at least I probably have footage of myself somewhere during all the trips and stuff on YouTube if you needed it, for sure.
Yeah, that's fine. Or we just pick random Simpson characters. Just sort of. I'm joking.
And with the help of AI,
I'm open to anything. You could put a photo of a dog turd if you had to for me. So.
No. No, great question, Shine.
Okay.
All right. So if we're ready to go, I'm going to mark us in. I'm going to do the intro. We're also pretty free flowing. So if you feel the need to interrupt, just, you know, speak up, step in. Shine and I won't. I have a tendency to go down Roger rabbit holes, as we call them, when I'm with Shine, and he has a tendency to not pull me back out. So
I bring trouble with
so if we do that, Rob or anyone else, just, you know, come on, back on track, guys. All right, so here we go. Welcome back to Authentic, everyone. Scott Roger Chafian here, and what you just heard was the roar of the J57 engine in the F100, the Hun, in something that unfortunately all too often was known as the Sabre dance. And if you don't know what that is, you're about to find out. It's one of the most intriguing and infamous characteristics of aircraft in U.S. history. Welcome to the channel. Today we're doing something a little bit new. We're doing the first of 3 parts in an experiential series, and our topic for the first one is the F100. So first of all, what is an experiential series? Well, we're going to dive even deeper than Authentic traditionally does. We're going to talk about the history of the aircraft. We're going to talk about the science, physics, and build of the aircraft. And then we're going to talk about how you can experience the aircraft, even one like this, that has not flown on active duty in decades, and of which very, very few exist. With us today to help with that are Rob Grady from Authentic, Brian Sunshine Sinclair, who you know from the channel, and 2 members from Grinnelli Design, Joe Grinnelli and Jay Nelson, who I'll introduce to you here in a minute, who are 2 of the moving factors bringing the F100 experience back to life. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Wonderful. Appreciate you having us.
Great, thank you.
Really happy to have you guys here. So this is the experiential series that we talked about, and we're going to start with how you can experience the F100. And this can be a little bit of a tease because later on I'll do an episode with some visitors on the history of the F100. Shine will get into the technology of the F100. But with that, let's go ahead and jump in. And Joe, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself to the audience and let everyone know what you do, who you are, and what you're bringing to the F100 story.
So my name is Joe Grinnelli, avid gamer and aviation enthusiast, and came together with a handful of good friends over the years of flying and enjoying our time in the virtual skies to put together a company to chase down doing some flight simulation software. So we decided that now was a better time than any to try to get our feet wet in that arena. And I feel like we have a really strong team put together, and we're ready to hit the market soon with our first official F100 Super Sabre product.
Yep.
You're
muted, Shine.
Hey, did you guys hear a lot of background?
Yeah.
I did. I was going to ask, does it record the microphone tracks individually? Because
It does.
It does.
It does.
Okay,
I think
cool.
it was me.
Sorry about that.
Apologies.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
No worries.
Oh, was that you, Rob?
Yeah, it was.
Can't take you anywhere.
as long as it's got them individually, then that's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
great question.
Yeah.
Great
good call.
question.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Joe. Nelson, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so I've been working on DCS since probably about 2019 when I started with the A4 mod. A friend and I we wrote the EFM for the A4 and various kind of systems. My original background is in physics, and so yeah, I really enjoy kind of the problem solving that comes with DCS. Then I went on to work for Heat Blur, where I did the radar, the AN/APQ 120 for the F4, a lot of the weapon systems, and the RWR, the ALR 46. And then after that, I've been working at Grinnelli Designs doing kind of all the kind of various technical systems like the electrical system, hydraulics, damage. We wrote like a flight model tool, which I'm sure we'll get into later, and weapon systems and all these kinds of things that are necessary for a plane to exist in DCS.
Awesome. So for any listeners who don't know what DCS is, and I think the majority of you do, but if you're here and you're not used to DCS, Digital Combat Simulator is just an amazing simulator. It's exactly what it says, of aviation platforms in an interactive virtual world. And what we're going to talk about today with Jay and Nelson, as I said, with the F100, is exactly how close they can get you to the real experience of having flown the aircraft. And that's why we've got Shine here to talk about what it's really like to fly an aircraft. So I'm really excited about this because there are a couple other products in DCS that I've flown. I mean, I'm not a pilot, so I always feel like a little bit of a poser, but I said, oh, I flew this aircraft in DCS. But as a historian, having read a lot of books, processed a lot of information about the air war in various different eras, DCS brings a level of understanding that you just don't get from even reading firsthand experiences or even from watching videos. And I think the Hun, or as it's known, the F-100, is, and again, I told Joe that I would not steal his thunder. I think it's a great platform to experience a very specific and unique era of American aviation history. So with that, Joe and Nelson, where you want to weigh in, why the F-100? What led you to choose that for this effort?
So we had a list of airplanes that we all were sort of passionate about. I guess the root of it really begins. We need to select something to present to Eagle Dynamics that allows us to hit all the qualifications that they require. So they like us to have subject matter experts. That gets increasingly more difficult over the years, especially into the World War II arena, where a lot of these gentlemen are few and far between, and we've lost more than I'd like to admit. And it's really something that is a time crunch to a degree. On top of subject matter experts, documentation is extremely important. Access to airframes is another thing that's extremely important, although not necessarily a 100% requirement to be able to make a module the right way. It certainly helps move the process along towards getting that official contract from Eagle Dynamics. So when we decided what should we do, I went to Eagle Dynamics and Matt Wagner, and I wrote them a pitch. We've been in the DCS modding space as players, as community members for years. So Nelson had worked on the A4 with his friends, and one of the most popular, if not the most popular mod that was ever released for free for DCS World. And myself and Brandon and some of the other guys on the team have been working on other free mods, from air racing, Edge 540s and extra 300s, to some more interesting challenge items like hot air balloons and rockets. And Eagle Dynamics knew that we had the groundwork in place and understood the platform and what needed to be done. And it was really a matter of getting across the finish line, of getting a contract in hand. I'll be 100% honest. The F-100, while on the list, was not the number one choice when we went to Eagle Dynamics. It was still in the Century Series arena. And I won't mention what that aircraft is. We'll have to leave that a mystery.
Really?
But the F-100 was the number 2 pick. And some of the gentlemen on our team, we had fathers that have flown it. And during the course of this whole process that's taken us about 2.5 years, some of these fathers have passed away. Suddenly, unexpectedly, and it's horrible, and it guts me inside that speaking with a gentleman about F-100s, and then 2 weeks later, getting a phone call from his son saying he's gone, and I'm like, what do you mean he's gone? And he's like, he's gone. And his father had passed away, and it was just really, it was something that drove home the importance of the history of what's going on, the magnitude of how much effort and energy that these men put in at such a young age, and now we're starting to lose these guys. It really put the whole thing into perspective and amplified my intensity personally on how much energy and effort we had to put in to preserve the history that what these guys put in and what they sacrificed.
Yeah. Well, and it's greatly appreciated, because you touch on a really key point, which is we lose, unfortunately, everyone with time and veterans with time. And, I've heard people say you could not make Band of Brothers today, right? They had to make it when they made it to get it right the way they did. And if you look at the timeline, we're about at that time with Vietnam, which was the heyday of the F-100 in its, combat operational life. So, really appreciate what you're doing. And I think that is really critical, just, personally as an American, a Western ally, and then also as a historian. So sometimes it can be hard to move on right from a sensitive and deep moment like that, but pushing forward, how do you go about creating the module? How do you start to translate the actual airframe, the cockpit, because obviously that is the user experience, primary visual interaction. How do you do that?
So our main process includes photogrammetry and scanning of as many airframes as we can get our hands on. I have been extremely blessed by the aviation gods to have been connected with amazing people like Dean Cutshaw, Mr. Rick Sharp, and the Georgia Museum. They all gave us opportunities to experience the F-100 like no other ordinary civilian could really experience the F-100. The Super Sabre Society, which is comprised of the Sabre veterans, a lot of these gentlemen did not just fly F-100s, they flew A7s, A10s, F-16s. They really existed in the golden era, I believe, in aviation, where they were young 20-year-olds getting thrown in F-100s, finishing their careers, being the first ones across the line in Desert Storm and F-16s and F-15s and other, Air Force related accolades. It's just unbelievable, the history and the knowledge base that I got access to. It all started when a gentleman by the name of Dewey Clawson, who was legendary in the Super Sabre Society, and he was one of the first guys that they interviewed on CNN in Desert Storm. Really quite incredible. He invited me with open arms to come in and join the Super Sabre Society at one of their reunions at the Ohio National Air Force Museum in Ohio. So I got to go out there. I met with about 25 of the Sabre Society guys. We walked the museum together and got a lot of shared knowledge. We had gentlemen that were, reminiscing about going from F-100s to 105s, and some of them were in 106s. Some of them went into the A10s. And it was really just a magical experience. And that all culminated with a trip to Fort Wayne, Indiana, to Mr. Dean Cutshaw, who basically gave me full access to his airframe and his crew. So as a guy like myself that has always been an avid aviation enthusiast, but never served or flew anything in a military capacity, it was really breathtaking to kind of be brought in with open arms and treated like family and one of their own from the very beginning. I've never met a nicer group of people in my life. They immediately recognized that I had been doing my research and my homework about the airframe. And with my experience having some ASE certifications for automotive mechanics in my younger years, they knew that they picked up quickly that I knew my way around the shop, the tools, the different things, and immediately put me to work. And it was a dream that I couldn't have really asked for, because how many guys get to work on the last F-100s in America? I mean, it's an honor and a privilege. So I strayed away a little bit, but getting access to these airplanes allows us to go in. We can bring audio recording equipment, laser scanning equipment, and some high-end photography equipment that allows us to do millimeter accurate scans and photogrammetry of the real airframes. We take that information back, we process it, and turn that into a really, really high polygon model that our lead artist Thomas would then go in and start modeling over. So effectively, the DNA of our digital product is surrounded in not only Mr. Cutshaw, but also the Collings Foundation F100, as well as the primary core airframe that we are doing, which is the 995 in General Goddard's F100D. So when we got access to Georgia, they had General Goddard's airframe on the floor, canopy open, ready to be explored. The gentleman at the museum in Georgia did a phenomenal job in restoring General Goddard's aircraft to basically the way it sat on the ramp in Vietnam, ready to go. I was blown away by the amount of history that was in there, the panels, the accuracy, the whole 9 yards. So our DNA is based on General Goddard's airframe 995, and it is millimeter accurate to what they would have been flying in Vietnam. So we're very proud of that, and we're happy that we can capture that history and preserve it in such a way that's basically photorealistic.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And how long does it take for you? I mean, is it? And you and I have texted and chatted. And I know that you've visited these folks, but how long did it take for you to go down there and to scan it and then capture it and then bring it back?
So the scanning process took us 2 days in Georgia. We spent 2 days in Texas with the Collings airframe, and I spent a week in Fort Wayne with Mr. Cutshaw and his crew.
Wow.
The majority of it it doesn't necessarily take a long time to capture. It's a matter of the quality at which we can capture it. And I have some interesting media that we can share that you can see just how crazy accurate the 3D digital scans are. It really just allows us to go the extra mile with accuracy and just staying faithful to what these airframes really are.
So Joe, I had no idea. So basically you've created, or you are creating, a digital twin of the F100D. Safe to say?
It's 100%. We have cloned General Goddard's airframe.
That's fantastic. So in industry, we still use that today. So I'm retired Navy, and work outside the industry now. And model-based systems engineering, MBSE, requires a lot of digital twins. So in other words, when we design a missile or an airframe or something, before we bend metal to adjust something, we want to see how it's going to affect the other subsystems. And so digital twins are huge. So it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. So you could, in your digital twin, you could increase the tail volume, for example, and you could change the stability. Is that as
Absolutely
as granular as it gets? Okay. That's fantastic.
A lot of that would happen in the programming more so than the actual 3D art. From a gaming standpoint, the airplane could look like a 3D model of a hot dog. It'll still fly like an F100 because we programmed it to fly like an F100. That's a little bit of a difference between I feel aerospace industry, where we're actually doing wind tunnel, we're testing, we're making models, even if they're scaled down models that run in wind tunnels or other kind of scientific data organization. We in the gaming industry, the real heart and soul of the way the airplane will operate is behind the zeros and ones in the code, and the art is more we can do what we need to do with the art without having it affect the airflow of the wing, or the shape of the wing, or the slat won't change the way that the plane flies if it's not millimeter accurate.
Sure thing.
Right. Yeah. But I would also say that, kind of back to your point, part of what Sunshine was saying is that you are creating an amazing a digital twin for historic and for posterity, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
of what these folks experienced and what they did. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, it just we have a friend of the channel whose grandfather flew several different very well-known RAF aircraft in the Second World War, and I talked with this individual at length on another episode, and then going in, pardon me, and being able to fly one of those airframes in DCS just gave me the opportunity to understand both of the aspects we just talked about, right? There's the what did it look like in the cockpit, and what were the challenges of a system designed when we weren't thinking about the man-machine interface necessarily the way we do today. We weren't thinking about how hard it was to reach that switch, or could you really see this very well, or even just and the F-100 is going to be the same way. How did these guys ever keep sight of another aircraft in a dogfight, or that target on the ground as they're rolling and dodging flak and trying to look around the canopy frames? And on the flip side is, for example, in World War II, the dynamics of the torque of the reciprocal engine, or of two engines that aren't contra-rotating, and what do you do with that? And it just brings the whole historical experience of what these guys did to light. Because it's one thing to read about rolling inverted as 57 millimeter A's coming up at you over North Vietnam or Laos or South Vietnam, and looking for your target. Oh man, that all sounds really hard, and I don't even know how to fly. And then actually trying to do it when the airframe itself, in some cases, is fighting you. And maybe that's a good opportunity to transition next to sort of the status of the airframe modeling, where we are, and what things, what won't you do? Are there any things you won't do? As we said at the top of the show, the Hun was infamous for the saber dance. I assume that's going to be the experience. And having seen the video from, the first look you guys did, the saber dance is there. So let's talk through about where you are on the build and the complexities of actually doing that.
So we're definitely making leaps and bound progress. We are currently in the flight model review stage with Eagle Dynamics with the F-100. So flight model, systems modeling, all intact, all ready to go and be tested. We have them currently engaging in the flight model review now, and we definitely will represent the saber dance and a lot of the other quirks that were really highlightable in the Super Sabre flying regime. Definitely the adverse yaw is a big deal, and there's a lot of engine quirks, and there's a lot of different little things, even down to the way that you ignite the afterburner is like no other aircraft really in DCS. Maybe the MiG with a button press, but a lot of people are unaware the throttle goes outboard past a certain range, and sometimes the afterburner wouldn't always light. Sometimes it would light and the pedals would open halfway, and it would be a disaster. So I think there's a little bit more than Nelson can add to the flight model and the engine side of it, if you would.
I was just going to touch on the engine thing with the afterburner. There's a significant amount of delay with the Dash 21 afterburner, which is what most of the F-100s had. And so you could wait up to kind of 1.5 seconds before the afterburner would even kick in. And while the afterburner is kicking in, the petals have actually opened up, and that just completely dumps all the thrust from the actual turbojet. So you have no thrust while you're waiting for the afterburner, and then suddenly the thrust kicks in and you start shooting off. So all these kinds of things are modeled in our aircraft.
Shine.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, so I worked with a couple of folks across the pond there, Nelson, and is it called reheat? Is that right, the afterburner?
I think the RAF guys tend to call it. It's a reheat.
Awesome. So can we anchor on the engine simulation for a little bit? Can I pull some threads?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so first thing I think with the J57, right? It was novel in that it had 2-stage compressors, right? Low and then high stage compressors, which was awesome, but it was moody at times, right? And so to me, it seemed like the fellas, and I've never flown it, so me just reading accounts here, it seems like you had to really ease into the power. You couldn't just kind of slam it forward, slam it aft, throttle
exactly
chops.
correct,
Yeah, so it was real temperamental. When it came to compressor stalls, it seemed like it had at slow speed, high alpha or angle of attack, right? You had some compressor issues. Are you guys able to model that too?
Yeah. So if you slam the throttle from idle, you will immediately get a compressor stall pretty much every time.
Okay.
It does vary based on which afterburner can you have. If you have the newer afterburner can, they somewhat reduce the compressor stalls. And also you get those compressor stalls from high angles of attacks. For example, if you spin the aircraft, it will compressor stall and all that goodness. So yeah, that's all modeled in there, and the effects.
Okay, and I'm assuming you have some kind of original database kind of point of departure, and then from there you can tailor it to the F100. So if you can talk about, where did you get your original engine data?
That would be a question for Brandon. I'm
Okay.
not exactly sure where the original F100 data came from.
Okay.
We do have a lot of, talking about like the flight dynamics and stuff, we have lots of NASA documents, and they go through all kinds of aerodynamic data. So usually with flight modeling, you start off with a coefficient-based approach, because in real-time simulation, it's you can't run a wind tunnel, like a virtual wind tunnel. So that's quite it's a tool used in design, but it's not something that you can use in real time, just because it takes so much compute power to run.
Mm-hmm.
So in the game, you have there are lots of coefficients which will, the most obvious coefficient is the coefficient of lift, as everyone knows. As the angle of attack increases, the coefficient of lift increases. There are also other things. The coefficient of lift changes with Mach and all these things. So in our model, we have hundreds of these coefficients for all different kinds of parameters, and we have huge tables filled with kind of thousands of parameters, which change based on Mach and angle of attack and side slip and all these things. And so that basically all builds up to the final picture, which are those forces and moments on the airframe, and that's what gets modeled in real time. And I think someone mentioned earlier about, is there any things we miss out? And we don't really have a choice, because the player can fly the plane however they like. They can do things that would otherwise get them killed in real life. So we have to make sure that every possible orientation of the envelope is covered. So even if you do a tail slide or you get into some weird situation when you end up flying backwards, like all of that has to be well defined, and it has to be realistic to what the real aircraft would have done. Some of that does require extrapolation because we don't have real wind tunnel data for it, but for the majority of the regimes, we do have really accurate wind tunnel data. And then just to finish on that, we put all these coefficients in from the NASA models, and then we have a testing tool where we can take basically real world test data and we match it to that. So we have, there's a basically like a test where a pilot flew a real F100 and he slams the aileron over to the side. They recorded the position of the stick over time, and they recorded the position of the aircraft, and we can basically replicate that test in our flight model tool, and we can see if the results match, and if they don't match, we can adjust our coefficients to make sure that they do match. There's quite a lot of effort gone into it.
Yeah. So, okay. So what I'm hearing, so we kind of migrated from the engine to the aero side. So the aero, it sounds like you guys were using original NACA reference memorandums, right? Like
Yeah. So all kinds of different coefficient data.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So for the fellas at home, I guess, or the listeners at home, so NACA, right, was a precursor to NASA. They were the legit,
Yes.
They were the single source on the US side anyway for aerodynamics. And they would literally, in this case, they put a 45-degree swept wing reference model in a wind tunnel, and got a whole bunch of coefficients, measured a whole bunch of stuff, got some coefficients, some yaw derivatives, roll derivatives, right? They put it in a report, and then you guys use that, it sounds like, as your point of departure or your initial assumptions. Is that
Yeah,
true?
yeah. So you start
Okay.
with the coefficients
Yeah.
because those are the things which are the most. You can't start from test data because you don't really have a baseline of how you would generate those forces. So you
Okay.
always have to start with those coefficients, and they get you kind of in the ballpark. And then there are obviously things which are missed in terms of the coefficient model, so you have to adjust those coefficients slightly and or add other ones and account for that by making sure it matches that transient data that you get with those other tests, like the roll one I mentioned.
And to
And
me,
there's like
those iterative things are like nonlinear aerodynamic solvers. Is that what you so like highfalutin flight dynamic models? Is what you're
yeah,
using?
yeah. So the coefficients themselves are non-linear. They're not linear based on AOA or anything. So it
Okay.
does get quite complicated to tune the whole thing because you've got such a range of space where you can adjust all these different things. But the nice thing about our tool is that every time we come across one of these real world tests, we write a little script. It can run our flight model in the script, and it can run it in like a couple of milliseconds. And then as we find all these different tests, we build up a library of all these tests together. And so then we can run all of them after we've made changes, and we can see if other ones have changed. And we can come back and say, oh, we adjusted this, but it broke something else. So we have to go back and find another solution to make sure it all matches simultaneously, which is kind of the difficulty when you're tuning a flight model. You tune one thing and then something else goes out of whack. So you have to be very careful. So having all those tests that you can run in seconds is really powerful because you can very quickly iterate and without fear of ruining the flight model as it is.
Wow. Okay. So to me, swept wing, I think of the F-86 starting with a 35 degree, and then obviously you guys with the F-100 and the 45, and that was all to basically minimize wave drag going transonic, so you could slip through the number, go supersonic, right, more quickly, more easily.
Yeah, barely though
Yeah.
in the F-100.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But now there are trade-offs, right? We know aero design is a series of compromises. So if we make it more elegant to get through the number, but then you have some high speed and some low speed kind of obstacles, right? And low speed, we can talk saber dance in a little bit. But do you mind if I pull the thread, kind of anchor here a little bit, Roger, and talk about high speed, some of the issues they had now in the F-100, and then how they duplicate it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So to me, Nelson, I tend to think of inertial coupling, right? So you're going wicked fast there for you Boston folk. And then from there, let's say I snap roll. So I'm going to take my stick and I'm going to move it hard left, for example. And now, as everybody knows, roll and yaw are coupled. So when you roll, you're going to create a little bit of yaw. And hopefully folks know the roll, yaw, and pitch stuff. And then what will happen is you're high speed. And so now you've got these additional aerodynamic forces, and you have inertial forces, right, of the plane itself, just how heavy it is and how it moves through the air. And so I had read, once again, didn't get to fly, but at high speed, they had a lot of roll yaw coupling issues that could, turn the plane not quite sideways, but enough into the slipstream or the side wind, we'll call it, that actually break the airframe. So are you guys able to duplicate that kind of high speed complexity?
Yeah, you see, so the underlying physics engine of DCS will allow you to model these the inertia tensor of the aircraft. So we have the inertia, the moment of inertia values for the various axes, and so that dynamics is built into the physics engine, and then we obviously have the aero data, which allows us to determine how much we can roll at various speeds. And we have specific tests on roll rates at high speeds and stuff, so we can actually make sure that's all the same. And so if you do start swinging it around and there is a huge amount of adverse yaw, you will eventually end up departing and flying a little bit sideways. So yeah.
Now with the high wire model, or maybe earlier than the D model, did they introduce a yaw damper to this thing?
There is a yaw damper and a pitch damper on the F-100, yeah.
Okay.
On the D, yeah.
It is on the D, okay. And then you guys obviously incorporate that in the control laws.
Yes, yeah. That's
all. Fantastic.
I mean, they're not very complex control laws. They're just very simple kind of washout filters, essentially.
Okay.
They're just resisting any. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, do you guys want to elaborate just for a quick moment on high wire shine or Nelson or Joe on what that was? Because that also spoke to which airframe you were modeling.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, let me give a real quick what I understand, and then Nelson, please feel free to correct me, and Joe. So, because I have some fragile knowledge, and you guys are the experts here. So So I think of the pitch up, so the pitch damping, as you talked about earlier, because we'll talk about the Sabre dance, but anyway, they're trying to mitigate the risk and keep the pilot alive, right? And so to me, the two big pitfalls are going to be high speed, the roll yaw coupling, and then low speed, the Sabre dance. And so pitch up behavior is going to be, risk is going to be mitigated there. And then also just the slow speed directional control. So they had like a larger tail. I always say tail volume because it's the area of the tail, but then it's at a distance from the center of gravity. So it's a moment, kind of like, it's easier to close a door if you hold on to the outside and push the door shut, as opposed to trying to close a door from right next to the hinge, right? So that directional stability is the yaw is going to be, the tail. And so the tail volume, as we call it, the roll yaw coupling improvement, and then the control harmony between the roll and the yaw, and having a yaw damper also just kind of help to keep the as I call them, the FNGs, right? The flipping new guys, get to keep them alive in the cockpit. So is that somewhat accurate, Nelson?
Yeah, I think the Project Highwire specifically, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, Grinnelly, but the Project Highwire specifically was relevant to the radar receiving equipment that they added to the aircraft. But I think the distinction you're talking about is from the F-100A, where they had a much smaller rudder, to the F-100D. I can't remember if the F-100A had a yaw damper or not. Probably not, based on what you're saying. And that's probably what they added, I guess, in the F-100D.
Okay.
For that purpose. But yeah, the F-100D did have its bigger rudder, although that did not completely eliminate the Sabre dance, which was obviously the main factor which killed aviators. Grinnelly, do you have anything to add?
The Project Highwire was a kind of a combination program. Like Nelson had mentioned, there was a lot of new technology that was coming that's later seen in F-16s and the A-10s and later aircraft that would come after. But the real Project Highwire plan was to try to normalize and standardize a lot of the airframes that were already in the field. You're talking about 20-year-olds in active combat areas where the airfields themselves are being assaulted and pilots are taking off into the enemy in the bush effectively and going out and flying their missions. A lot of the planes were just kind of slapped together. Repairs were made, and it didn't really matter if the heading indicator was in the number 2 position or the number 5 position in the dashboard, in the layout, in the grid, as well as some of the other weapon systems and other technology that was kind of being improved toward the late 60s, that these airplanes just got unmanageable. So Project Highwire was a way to standardize those airframes that were selected. There were only a certain number of airframes that were selected. They ranged from, as Nelson was talking about earlier, the Dash 21 or the standard afterburner that is very reminiscent of the F-16, or they later went to the Dash 23, which was from the 102, and they found that in the 102, the different style afterburner was a little bit more reliable. The J57 was able to run a little bit more reliably. With all things, they never fixed the problem. They just put Band-Aids on it. The A model F-100 had the smaller tail, wings, no flaps, really slick, really fast. It was the sports car. The intention was for that to be the next generation fighter. As things evolved, and as the Phantom and other planes that were developed that had a little bit more radar technology, a little bit more of the more modern missile technology, which we found later to be not as reliable as we would have hoped in the active combat situations, and not having a gun was a pretty big deal for some of the Phantom guys. But the F-100s kind of found a new home in the close air support and the bomb truck kind of way. It was almost like the F-100s were playing the role of what an A-10 would play in a more modern scenario, where the Phantoms go north and deal with MiGs and kind of instigate and stir up trouble. the F-100s that flew more sorties than any other airframe in Vietnam. Over 380,000 sorties were flown in Vietnam by Super Sabres. They really wanted to make sure that the airplane would do something good, something well. And when they really figured out that the fighter wasn't going to be the way, the fighter bomber, it started to transition. So Project Highwire added the raw radar homing and warning, which is the early versions of what you players would know as like the RWR and the Hornets and the F-16s, stuff like that. And it also added upgraded weapons, the AWRS for weapon release. It added a updated weapon control panel, which gave you a little bit more control over certain elements of your deliveries as the technology was improving, as well as updated transponders for IFF. Unfortunately, the IFF is not really that heavily modeled in the DCS World space. However, I've made sure that from radio encryption to transponders and IFF stuff, that we try to capture as much of the way the systems operate. The Highwire system really brought the planes together into a unified group. And it's a really interesting transition from the F-86 to the early F-100s to then the later F-100D. And really, our decision to go with the Project Highwire really was driven by the fact that we were given access to a Project Highwire jet that was basically 100% complete as far as it sat on the ramp in Vietnam. So that was a really big deal. And on top of that, a lot of the data and manuals that we have were post Highwire. So a lot of our raw data comes from the Project Highwire DNA. And we've gone through the motions to kind of make sure that that is entirely accurate and represented, but we also make available the ability for players to enjoy the airframe if they wanted to, say, not have the radar homing and warning equipment. We can remove that from the jet. If you want to force the player to the original Dash 21 Afterburner, we can do that. We can change the fuel probes that match up with the C model and some of the other models that they, when they were running, like the Thunderbirds had the straight probes on their airframes. The later Ds and the Highwires had the bent probe that was raised for pilot visibility. And we want to make sure that you can not only experience the Highwire jet, but you can experience the F-100 in a wide range of configurations that really encompasses the real core soul of the airplane, because it's really a complicated airframe to fly. And it's not necessarily complicated to learn and understand what's going on in the cockpit, but when you need to put this all into practice, it adds up very quickly.
Nice. And Joe, up at a high speed, high altitude, what's the first thing that's going to cause the screen to go red or kill the pilot, would you say? Is it going to be a yaw? Is it going to be a pitch, a roll? Engine?
It could be. And the engine, I mean, right now, my gut response would be treating the airplane like it is a fly-by-wire aircraft is going to be what gets you in trouble. And when you merge with the MiG-15, the 17, the 21, the 19, whatever it may be, and you start trying to maneuver the F-100 like an F-18, you're going to find yourself in a lot of trouble. A lot of the pilots used to also intentionally use the instability to depart the aircraft and then recover and all of a sudden be on the tail of their opponent, because the guy in the merge was like, where did he go? And he's just departed the airplane and almost did a whole flip and turned around and tumbled through the air. And then all of a sudden, he's on my tail. And there's a lot of really great stories on YouTube and other documentaries that were made pilots talking about doing such crazy maneuvers to try to gain an advantage. But at altitude, at speed, not overhandling the airplane is going to really get you in trouble. And if you have enough altitude, there is time to recover and try to get back into the fight. But if you're in a big fur ball and you're struggling with flying the airplane, you're obviously not going to be a very effective offensive tool to the rest of the package. So overhandling the aircraft is definitely a really quick way to find yourself in trouble.
We've had a lot of testers plant the aircraft into the ground through the saber dance or whatnot.
Yeah, smoking holes, got it, from over control. Okay, so if you have to finesse the stick, as we call it, so now I'm going from I think it's irreversible hydraulically boosted, right? Stick flight controls, I should say, for the F100. Can you guys duplicate some of that and I don't know anything about DCS, I apologize. Can you duplicate that in a stick? So can you have force gradients, breakout, control forces?
Yeah, I mean, the main limitation here is the person's hardware. So obviously they only have a spring-based kind of flight stick or whatever they're using.
Okay.
So in that regard, the only real limitation you can put is how strong would the pilot actually be. And with the F100, it's not really a big concern. There are very few regimes where the pilot is limited in his strength to actually pull the stick. However, if someone has a force feedback stick, so it actually moves using motors and stuff, we have modeled the entire bob weight system, which is the artificial feel system for the stick. So if you have a force feedback stick, as you pull, the increased G-force will cause that bob weight to pull back on the stick for you to give you an idea of the supposed aerodynamic forces that you obviously can't actually feel.
I'm excited for that because Rob has turned me on to a force feedback control stick. It makes such a difference in the immersion experience.
And so can you feel in the stick when the jet is untrimmed also?
The force feedback stick would work exactly the same way. So when you set the center, the stick is gonna go to the center of wherever the trim is. And obviously, if you're having to hold it to keep the aircraft level, then you're going to feel those forces. So it works the same way. If you trim all the way forwards on the ground, your stick will just sit all the way at the front. And if you trim all the way back, it'll do the same thing.
So Shine, one of the things for example, I generally have been flying the F4 for quite a while, but there's telemetry that comes out of, virtually flying the F4. No, not really. So, but the telemetry from the software, from DCS, from the module comes out, and the stick is loose, or it'll start banging and shaking. So, to Roger's point, it's amazing in terms of the experience that you can get now. And this is just in the last year or so. I've been doing this, but it makes a huge difference in terms of the experience that's so unique to that aircraft compared to a different one, which might be fly by wire, which is, it's interesting. So I'm very excited to see this, Nelson. I'm really excited.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and so for me, flying a couple different planes, right? I flew some tail draggers and all that at SNJ, and my situational awareness is not just based on what I see; it's also what I hear. So the engine, the air over the canopy or over the wings. Sometimes you can actually hear where the shock wave as it migrates fore to aft in a transonic regime, and then the stick. And those stick pressures were huge for trimming or for side slip and all that, whether it be some rudder application necessary in a turn. So anyway, I'm just very impressed that I didn't know there was such a thing as force feedback stick. So it's just another sensory input for you to make you feel more immersed. And then last bit is, so Roger and Rob, you both mentioned you caveated your experience with your virtual pilots. I'll tell you what, keep in mind nowadays that you guys are actually pretty close to what's going on for a lot of the MQ series guys, right? The MQ-9s. So the drones out there, the drone operators are in a van in the Nevada desert or sometimes the SoCal desert. So you guys are getting a lot of the experience that they are, you know. So I definitely don't sell yourself short with
Well,
calling yourselves
I'll
virtual.
just say this. Even as early as this morning, my wife would have loved to put me in a van in the middle of a desert. So I think
what's in the box, Rob? But
yeah.
so let's transition a little bit to the experience, right? Because you know, Shai, I'll just echo when I got the force feedback stick, the difference, and again, this Rob has really added me into the F4 this summer. The difference when you're head out of the cockpit, night fighting with somebody, and having to worry about what's my speed, because without the force feedback, you're like, oh crap, why did I just depart, or why did that just happen? Oh, because I got slow, or my AO, I pulled too much G, my AOA is too great for this aircraft. Now the stick's telling me, and I don't have to take my eyes off my target, which, you know, as you know better than I do, is huge. So it's been a real game changer. With that in mind, you know, Joe and Nelson, what are your visions for the settings where people are going to be able to enjoy this? Obviously with the D model, and I will be completely upfront, near and dear to my heart, is the Misty Fast Fact mission, which I know you guys you're just modeling a single seat for the moment, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So where do you envision the scenarios, and how involved are you when guys start to build scenarios? Because and we'll talk about in the history mission, but or in the history episode when I talk about it, Misty Fast Facts were guys who used the F-100 to go mark targets for, quote, fast movers. It's crazy to think about a jet as the slow, you know, the slow mover. But where are you envisioning these scenarios, and how involved are you when people develop them?
Well, we really have a limitation as far as what we have available for maps and locations. So obviously, the Marianas map is going to be a surrogate for the jungle scenario. The air show guys will love hanging out at NTTR at Nellis, I'm sure. Theoretically, though, if we're going for historically accurate sorties or trying to recreate those individual items, we're going to have to use care and have to bend the rules a little bit to achieve that. I think a lot of the content that we can provide from a point of release day, the instant action missions will kind of just be all one-off areas around different parts of the map, just to allow players to be able to get their feet wet and try to see levels of difficulty. I'd like to tier this into 3 levels, kind of like an easy, medium, hard, or doable, maybe an overwhelming, and combine that with a little bit of a campaign idea. I had met with Baltic Dragon at the latest expo in Chicago, and we had an opportunity to sit down and talk together about some ideas that we wanted to try to capture. And I know that he had interest in trying to do his own thing with a campaign, and I thought it would be an interesting idea to maybe collaborate where we could do a couple missions that are free, that are included with the airplane on release, that kind of it's like a prologue to a Baltic Dragon campaign, and let that kind of evolve into
by the
something
way,
more. Yes.
he was supposed to be here today, and I'm very disappointed in him, and he will hear from me. But yeah, we were supposed to have BD here with us today, but I will tell that, and I'm also been looking at the C-130 module that's currently pre-released. I've been looking at some of the content BD has done for that, and it's fantastic. So I would highly encourage, enlisting him in some form or fashion, especially now. Shaming him for not being here would be great too.
Absolutely. But there's opportunity. We're definitely going to provide the community with some core level content. It's very difficult to try to do the historical thing from the standpoint of actual like dotting the I's and crossing the T's, if you will. We're still going to make an attempt to do the right thing for data that we have and things that we can try to put together. I think at a broader perspective, though, for the single player community, we will be targeting from training to kind of moving beyond the training into like a skills campaign. And then we'll move into something more probably with Baltic, and look to maybe do some kind of prologue that can lead into some content that he was thinking about doing. But we're definitely going to have an overarching umbrella that will cover everybody as far as the single player content. The map side of things, Nevada, the Marianas, I mean, we could do things on Caucasus and still have it be fun. A lot of our a lot of the player base, everyone has that map and everyone kind of knows that area. So when it comes to multiplayer, it might be more advantageous to put together some hypothetical scenarios where landscape and knowledge of the area is a little bit more fluent than saying, let's go out and buy Syria or Kola if we didn't already, and then have to tackle not only learning our way around the map, but also trying to deal with this airframe that's a handful. But everything will be on the table. We want to support our peers that have other maps in development and things that have been released. There's some wonderful sceneries that are out there, and we want to just make sure that we have something for everyone.
Well, it sounds really exciting. Now, if I'm tracking, and I may not be, sometimes I don't. You can ask Shine. So you're going to have the ability, even though you are modeling the D with such granularity, that you will almost be able to retrograde to some of the earlier models. So then possible to have missions where you get assigned, which is still just astounding to me when I read about them. These guys in the 50s and 60s who were like, well, yeah, my job was going to be to on the alert hop in with a nuke under my bird and go low and fast to drop on a Soviet or East German airfield, and then I probably wasn't coming home. Oh, by the way, in the F-100 doing the dive or the not the dive toss. Do I mean dive toss?
Labs.
Is that one? Yeah, the labs approach.
Yes. So this is a really great question there. I'll try to be as concise as possible. The experience that we want to provide here with this module is not just a hyper-focused, you're getting 995 General Goddard's baby that was flown. You are going to be able to explore a wide variety of the legacy of the F-100 when it comes to changing the probes for the fuel delivery, the afterburner, the radar homing and warning, and a bunch of other things. Not only that, but you had mentioned the F and the Misties, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. We've also decided that because we don't have the ability to get an F model done in time, or maybe if not ever, we don't know yet, but I would like to, but the focus was more on just making sure that we had the D and the art ready for that. We decided that it would be a really good idea to add the Shrike to the D model. It's the same pylons, it's the same weapon system, everything is the same. The only thing that we're kind of stretching is they really only put the Shrike on the F model, but it certainly could have went on the D model. But until there's an F model, we wanted to be able to allow the community to capture the Misty aura and just the absolute legacy that they left as one of the first in that arena. And on top of all of this, when we were talking about Project Highwire, there's a lot of features and little things that we've added into the airplane. I don't think we've really ever discussed this live yet, but now is as good a time as any for cats to come out of bags. Because the F-100s were so unique or individualized, we've added a way to customize the dashboard of the airplane within reason. So when you look at General Goddard's airplane, the gauges will be in a configuration for Project Highwire. When you look at some of the older manuals, you'll notice that the ADI is in a different spot and the heading indicator is different spot, and the radio company, everything is all over the place. And these guys were not always flying, in quotes, their airplane.
Oh, wow.
An alarm would go off, the sirens would go, they're running out to airplanes. It doesn't matter whose airplane you're getting in, you have to go, and you're going. So I thought it was really something special to, now this is something that we're not forcing on people. So by default, you will be in a 995 high wire configuration. If you want to take it to the next level, you can use a web GUI that we're developing to rearrange certain number of gauges that were the ones that were primarily jumbled around. And you could set up your own configuration that you personally like, or you could set up a configuration that you found in a manual or some photo online. And on top of that, if you really want the real deal experience, we have an ability or a checkbox that gives the player the opportunity to randomize the cockpit within reason between about 6 to 8 core layouts that were popular in our research that we kind of came across and kept noticing and documented. So every time you get in the plane, it might be Goddard's, it might be like what Rick Sharp sees in the Collins plane, it might be what Dean saw in the F-100 in his plane from Texas, it might be an early C or a Thunderbird configuration. So there's a lot of interesting things that we're trying to give the people the ability to not only experience the high wire and the D as a late model D, but we want you to be able to experience the entire grand scheme of what it was like to fly an F-100. The other interesting aspect, which I think Nelson can touch on too, the ability to add and remove the radar homing and warning system. So everything is going to be at the mission editor's beck and call. If they want you to have a -23 upgraded afterburner, they have to do that for you in the mission editor before you actually get in the airframe. Once you get in the airframe, depending on whether you have your radar homing and warning gear or what afterburner you have, there are things that you can customize on the ramp. You can ask the crew chief to change the fuel probe from a straight to a bent or even remove it. You can ask the crew chief to do other things like add or remove the starter cartridge to eliminate the need for an air cart or ground power. And I think all of that comes together to really give your own personal feel of how you want to fly the airplane. And sometimes when you're going in to do a sortie with a community or a group of friends, maybe your skills are tested because now you're in a straight probe, no radar homing and warning, and standard afterburner plane when you're more used to maybe flying it with the -23, and your skills are tested on operational and actual flyability of the airplane. So that's really cool. And I think one of the greatest features that we have that we've added to this airplane is the radar homing and warning. It adds a level of complexity and intensity to just how stressful the flights were.
That's awesome. Shine. I have several thoughts. I think I'm going to defer to you though as the test pilot for, because I like my example. Obviously, flying DCS, I've flown the F4E and become very familiar with it to the point where I was watching something about Robin Olds the other day, and immediately they showed the cockpit of his aircraft. I'm like, well, I know that wasn't any. I don't remember which one it was, but I could tell. So it makes a difference. Personally, if you switch to a long gun that's not modeled around AR-15 controls, you pick up an AK or you pick up something else, your muscle memory, you go to drop a mag, and if you're not thinking about it, you're not going for the right control. So, man, this is phenomenal, Joe, that you guys have done that and Shine from the test pilot perspective, and you have a number of airframes under your belt, so to speak. Pretty cool, right?
Can you guys hear me still?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. It's kind of anyway. Sorry.
What
Yeah,
I didn't tell you was I moved the location of your mute control while I was saying that, just to prove the point.
Oh, mute went away. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, absolutely, totally agree. Fantastic. Because one thing I love, so human factors is going to be the interface between the machine and the person, and how that goes well or poorly, right? And so for me, human factors, I think of scan patterns. And yeah, absolutely comes down to the heat of the moment. You're firing on two neurons, right? Where you're trying to visually acquire this guy, and you're going to look into the cockpit for something. And so I love the fact that you can move the instrumentation around, and you can folks. Then one thing I didn't realize, because I apologize, I haven't flown DCS, is you guys are experiencing history, or you're helping, I should say, players to experience history. So they can go from we'll call it a detuned F100A. That's got a bunch of roll yaw issues, smaller wings, smaller tail, harder to land, got to keep the speed up on the landing kind of thing. And then, and also just the hodgepodge of cockpit, or I call them steam gauges, right? The orientation of those, and the stress that the pilots would feel as they set the alert 5, the alert 7, whatever posture. They run and jump into a plane, and they look at it, and let's say it's nighttime and they're in a foreign airfield. They know they're going to get shot as soon as they bring the wheels up. And now they're trying to find their instruments, in the dark kind of thing. So I love the fact that people are absolutely immersed in the historical progression of the F100. So that is pretty cool. And then also testing what Chuck Yeager, I think, called the moral fiber, right? So how well a guy can actually handle the plane. And this is sans computers, so we don't have flight control computers. We don't have fly-by-wire in the F100. And so it sounds like you can fly the D, which has got the bigger controls, and it's a little easier. Still, there's a dance to it, right? Or you could detune it to the A, and really kind of you're off to the races. Because it sounds like that Sabre dance really bit the guys, especially in the A model. Is that true, Joe?
The A is not fully represented. Basically, what we've done is that when the transition from the A to the D was the larger tail, the addition of the wing fences, the flaps were added, and a couple other minor tweaks to aerodynamic design. The core element of what we're doing as far as the customizability, they never really fixed the problem. They just kind of put a Band-Aid on it into the D model, and then obviously just the F is just a little bit more extended. So it's basically the same DNA as the D. As far as aerodynamic data and regimes are concerned, we're not really adjusting we're not accounting for smaller wings or smaller tail, but we are accounting for engine configuration and other kind of cosmetic style stuff. So with the standard -21 afterburner, you're going to get an authentic D off the line kind of experience. Later with the -23 can from the 102s, you're going to see a little bit more increased engine performance and a little bit more increased engine reliability because of the thrust and different elements of how the engine really changes the way that the airplane flies. You'll see aerodynamic differences, but just at a base level, the A is not really represented. It's closer to more like you're able to kind of touch upon the Charlie model, the Delta model, and some of the things that the F model would have done. So just so that's clear.
It's like capturing all the different configurations that were seen in the F100D as opposed to the specific airframe. So the specific airframe that's always underlying our model is the F100D, but there are, of course, all the different fuel probes, the different engines, the different afterburner cans and all that stuff. So
You're still muted, Shine.
How about now?
You're good.
Okay, so sorry, my GUI here has gone away. Anyway, that's fantastic. No, I totally get what you guys are saying, and you're anchoring on the D model, and then, but yet, so let's say you wanted to have two guys out there. One's just markedly better, two DCS players out there. So you could kind of detune, if they wanted to fight same airframes, you could detune one of the Ds. So put in the older afterburner, right, where you got more of a lag or
Yeah.
maybe a blowout. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so the Dash 21 afterburner, which is the older one, I mean that takes 1.5 seconds roughly to light on average, whereas the F102 afterburner it's much shorter. I think it's like 0.2 seconds. So if you did want to do that, that would be a good way to do that. And
which
and
I think is
the newer
fantastic.
one is, sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, sorry, Nelson. I was just gonna say it's fantastic. So you can not necessarily tie one arm behind the guy's back in the knife fight, but pretty
Yeah.
close
Yeah,
to it, huh?
Well,
yeah,
it
makes it a
makes
little bit
me
more
think
difficult.
of, you hear about some of the real high time Tomcat guys who would go out and take an A just to prove to the newer guys flying the D's that it's not just the airframe, and they'd go wax the D pilot in the A with all of its engine limitations. It feels like it's analogous to that in some ways.
Yeah, it's the man in the box, right, from the
Yep.
Red Baron quote. Yeah. So yeah, totally with you. Yeah, we used to real quickly. Sometimes we go out and fight, and we would say, "Hey, the senior guy cannot use afterburner," and that would be our performance limitation against the new guy. So that is fantastic.
So
Should we?
looking at time and just wanting to be respectful of everyone's time, a couple things. We've teased the saber dance here a little bit. So who wants to take on describing the saber dance, not just what it was, but why it was such a big deal?
Well, the saber dance was something that was very unique to I don't want to say it was unique to, but it was one of the first times that the Air Force put their new guys into a plane that was readily able to just just have total disaster without fail almost consistently. I remember sitting with gentleman Ken that flew F-100s and F-4 Phantoms, and he pulled me aside in the reunion, and he tells me, he goes, just remember one thing, Joey. He goes, if you don't have one tail, one engine, and one seat, you ain't shit. And pardon my French, but it really got me thinking. And this gentleman happened to fly both F-100s and F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam. He was only shot down in F-4 Phantoms and never had a problem in the F-100, so he had a little bit of a bias there. But I also remember him telling me if they just designed a training aid for the newer pilots that was kind of in the shape of a Y that clipped onto the front of the seat. So imagine your stick is in the neutral position, and as you start pulling the stick back, that Y shape comes to a point, and the further you pull the stick back, the less you want to move your ailerons left and right to induce or to prevent the induction of the adverse yaw in the saber dance. These guys were flying in the pattern at 200 feet and using aileron to make their turns on final, and they're snapping the plane upside down at 200 feet and effectively lawn darting it, and there's no recovery from that. The other side of it is the famous video that every pilot probably saw from that moment on up until probably recently, and maybe they still show it, who knows, but that guy was coming in for a landing and then went into full afterburner and put way too much AOA on the airframe and started to stall the wing, and there was just no recovery. So a lot of the takeaways that I had from the actual F-100 drivers was drop the nose. That everybody told me at least 500 times, you got to drop the nose. If you cannot just pull unlimited AOA, it's not possible in this airframe. The other side of it was always use your feet in the pattern. So these guys were almost exclusively flying the pattern with the rudder, and mixing and matching the two. Some guys that were more experienced could obviously like the Thunderbird pilots were doing some incredible things with a really dangerous airframe, and it kind of blows my mind that they had the gall, the stones to actually go up and do it. And a lot of the disaster that came from the saber dance never really was solved. they tried to put a Band-Aid on it. And I remember in one of the documentaries, they basically, North American relied on the wit and skill of the pilots to be able to wrangle and handle being operational with these airframes in a combat environment. So I'm sure Nelson has a couple other things that he could maybe add from a technical standpoint of how we try to represent that properly, but it is 100% represented, and it never really truly went away. It just sort of got a little bit better. So definitely expect to struggle at first with the saber dance in the F-100D for sure.
I guess the main point from a technical perspective is that it just comes from the huge amount of adverse yaw. And for those that aren't familiar, adverse yaw is where basically the drag from the ailerons is kind of outstripping the actual performance of the aileron to roll the aircraft at high angles of attack. So the F-100 has just quite an incredible amount of adverse yaw when it comes to its ailerons. And so if you're at those high angles of attack, you're already near that danger situation. And if you start trying to, say your plane is rolling to the left and you're trying to get out of that roll and you roll to the right, well, the adverse yaw actually pushes you further into that situation and makes the whole thing much worse, which is why real pilots fell into the trap. And we see it all the time with our testers who have just got in the plane or whatever. They'll be flying the pattern, they come in and they're flying perfectly normally, and then they do their base to final turn, and then suddenly you just see them go and splat straight into the ground because they just let the aircraft get away from them. And that's why they say just to only use the rudder, because with the rudder you don't fall into that situation. The rudder, and especially on the D, it's much bigger. You always have the directional control that you expect, whereas with the ailerons you don't.
Can you hear me now, Roger?
Yep.
Oh, there you
Gotcha.
go. Yeah, so for the folks at home, so adverse yaw. So Nelson, you bring that up. And so because let's say I'm rolling left, and because it's adverse yaw, it's going to yaw me. It's going to kind of spin the plane right to the right or outboard of the turn, correct?
Yeah. So at that point, when you're at such a high angle of attack, your aileron is stalling. So you're, as I'm sure you know, and it's causing more drag than actual lift at that point, or I guess the aileron is trying to push the wing down. But it's stalling, and so it's not producing lift anymore. And that can actually create a stall on that wing as well that would have otherwise not been there, because it effectively increases the angle of attack, making the whole situation worse.
Right. And then I think of swept wings, I think of tip stall first, right? As opposed to, I'd rather have the root stall because the ailerons aren't usually inboard. So for the controllability. Exactly. And then when you have tip stall, so there's no lift out on the wing tips anymore. So the effective, I'm going to call it center of pressure.
Moment.
Yeah, exactly.
It to just roll over. Yeah.
Yeah, because the lift effectively moves forward on the plane with respect to the CG, center of gravity, right? So then it's going to pitch the nose up, and so it exacerbates. So it's got positive loop feedback, right? Or it just gets worse unless you handle it.
You've got that effect of the yaw, and then obviously the wingtip stalling, as you say, and just that whole situation. As it gets further into it, it makes the whole thing worse because now the angle of attack is higher, and so on. So then, you end up crashing, unless you realize it's happening and you push the nose forwards and you opposite rudder, basically like counter spin procedure type thing, and neutralize the ailerons. Sorry.
So it's like turning the wheel on your car to the right, and you start going to the left, and your gut says turn harder right, and you get more left the harder right you turn.
Yeah, and a skid
kind of like oversteer.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, totally.
So, no, go ahead, Sean.
Oh, sorry, last bit. Yeah, so Nelson and Joe, just because you both brought it up. Yeah, so having to correct a condition by stuffing the nose, or pushing forward anyway, is so counterintuitive when you're that close to the ground.
Yeah.
Right? You feel that altitude is your life insurance, and now you're basically draining the life insurance by stuffing the nose. But in reality, you're actually saving yourself because you're removing that stall condition on the tips, hopefully, which is going to mitigate a lot.
That's why the life insurance is there.
Yeah. Buy it back. Yeah. So.
Right.
Thanks.
So, no worries. Nelson, Joe, I'm going to give you guys an opportunity for a final word, but I'll let you think about that for a minute, because I'm going to ask, because people are going to give me feedback and kill me if I don't ask. How close are we to seeing this in the wild?
We are pretty close. One thing I've learned from being a player to now kind of entering the dev space here is that the death knell of any statement is to say it'll be ready on this day. what I can say is that we've tried to provide a level of transparency that has not been seen before in this space, and I think a lot of that comes from being a player for so many years. We decided that we were going to do a project tracker. We wanted to try to get the community involved in a level where you can see what we're kind of working on. Things can be talked about within reason without really trying to go overly dense and in-depth into too many features or promises that get made. If there's something that's worthwhile doing, we're going to attempt to do it. That's without a doubt. But trying to just have that information available for the community, I think, has given us the ability to continue working without a lot of that stress of, well, where are they? Are they under a rock? Or I haven't seen anything. And we try to really put together as often as possible, where relevant, some devlogs for the community and just let the process take shape as naturally as possible. Obviously, this is not our first rodeo. For Nelson, for myself, we've made airplanes for DCS. We've never made an airplane in the capacity where we were going to sell it with the confidence and level of completedness of an official project. So well, there's a little bit of... Well, technically Nelson has now, yes. At the time when we signed the contract, we didn't. And it's one of those things that hasn't really been a hindrance to the process, but we definitely don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And now that we're in the phase, like I can happily say that everything is pretty much ready. All the systems, everything that's major, from weapons to radios, circuit breakers, systems that you can interact with and some that you don't really see, but you're interacting with by proxy, like hydraulics and fuel and the engine and such. Everything is pretty much ready to go. It is in the hands of Eagle Dynamics. We've been going back and forth for a couple weeks now. And obviously with the C-130 on the 11th hour of release, there's going to be effort that's put into that and making sure that the C-130 is ready to go. And obviously they want that to be as finished and as nice as it can possibly be. So timing wise, I don't have any kind of metric to base it off of. This is the first time we're going through the process. We're trying to be as transparent as humanly possible with not only the community, but ED and what we've done and, how we've arrived at it. We've made these flight model reports available to the community as well, so that if you're really interested in the technical side of what we've been doing, that's totally available to try to digest. And just overall, from a time frame perspective, we're trying to move it as fast as humanly possible and just try to get it in the hands. We want it to be right, and we want it to be as bug-free as humanly possible. And that's pretty much where we are right now, between bug fixing and input from Eagle Dynamics, and just how do we cross the finish line with the quality control.
Fair answer. I mean, I appreciate that transparency, Sean. I don't know if you've been on the receiving end in the aviation community, but I know surface and expeditionary, a lot of times there are deadlines set in government contracts and you get what you get. And sometimes it's gear you are trusting your life to. And it's really frustrating when it's there because the deadline was there, not because it's ready. So Joe, I appreciate that philosophy of building a product.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a kind of a disconnect to the community of the when we're trying to develop these airplanes, and obviously if we could do them faster, we would do them we're trying to do them as fast as humanly possible. I definitely think that every developer struggles between the fine line of production and profitability. And if it takes us 5 years or 10 years or some ridiculous number to try to make a module for DCS, while our heart and souls are poured into it, and it may be the most accurate thing that you've ever seen, we're not really using the F-100 to train pilots. We don't have to worry about, like you just mentioned, trying to meet a contract deadline for deliverability for combat training or any other kind of training. And we all kind of struggle in this envelope of we always want to do more. Our peers at Heapler have been a prime example of how do you raise the bar. Every single time that they do something, they do it better than the last. They raise the bar from whether it's a system or art or anything of under the sun. And we look up to guys like that to really not only want to get involved in the space because we share the same passion, but we also want to try to match the quality and try to innovate from ideas that we get from them and others to just make a really good product. We fall into a trap when we start going overboard with certain things that don't really matter from an entertainment standpoint. So this has been a really big experience in not only are we trying to preserve the history of this airplane and the legacy of the men that flew it, but we also need to remember that we are trying to do more than just the F-100. It is a business at the end of the day, and there are expenses that go into trying to make these airplanes, and we need to have that balance. So hopefully, we meet everyone's expectation, and when the product is finally out, it'll be a huge weight off of everybody's shoulders, and I think the next one will just be better and faster. And hopefully there's opportunities to keep doing some of the Century Series stuff, or maybe find ourselves in something a little bit more modern, or maybe a little bit older. It really all just depends on where all the cards fall. But
I think the Thud has got your name. I think the F-105.
I would like to attack
Just
the 105 for sure, without a doubt.
Yeah.
There's a couple. The 106 is really cool. The 102 is really cool. I feel like if we could get a good response in the kind of Vietnam era, it'd be great if we could have a Vietnam map eventually. I know that they've said there's a Vietnam map on the way. We personally don't know anything about that, so I can't comment or speculate beyond what we've all seen in the community interviews with WAGs and other ED personnel. But I would like to personally chase down a little bit more of the Century Series and flesh that out. It's a really complete theater, with Red Stars coming up with the MiG-17 soon. And obviously we have a 15, we have Magnitude 3 and their MiG-21. We have the Phantom from Heapler. There's a Sky Raider in development from Crosstail Simulation. So a lot of our peers, we're all kind of putting our DNA into this theater. So having the map would really put us over the top. But the 105 was one of the airplanes that was on our list when we went to Eagle Dynamics. And that may or may not have been what was we were told not right now. And that's no problem, because there's a lot of other airframes too. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the P-40. I kind of have this crazy dream to make an SBD. I think the SBD and some of the Midway history is some of the most incredible, absolutely outlandish things that happened in some military history and air combat. So I figured maybe we could try to jump in there. Maybe we can. There's no promises into what is coming next, but you can definitely count on us for as many modules as we can humanly deal with. And with our experience with the F-100 now, we've been able to create our own internal libraries or SDKs, if you will, that allow us to have some reusability. And let's say that, 105, 106 was maybe on the horizon. It'll come together a lot faster because we have the DNA for that Century Series era. So while there are differences, obviously, between these airframes, a lot of it can come together faster. And the real problem is art. And the one thing that we've learned through this entire process is you can't rush art. There's nothing that we can do about it. You cannot rush it. It needs to be done the right way and at a level of quality and intensity that kind of matches the Heapler and Eagle Dynamics. And I mean, everybody makes nice models. All the models in DCS are phenomenal, and we need to be able to meet that standard. And it's not just a matter of the programming being a problem, or not a problem, but a time crunch. But art is always in the back of our minds as far as 5 guys working on programming and we have 1 guy working on the cockpit, because it would just be almost impossible to have more than 1 or 2 guys working on the inside and the outside, just due to the way that version control works, the way that the creative process happens with modeling versus programming, where I can write some code and then Nelson can come in and say, this looks great, this needs improvement, or we need to look at this, or we need to look at that. We all kind of can keep ourselves in check on the programming side. So that's, I think I might make a t-shirt that says "You can't rush art" on it. And we'll have that on the Grinnelli Designs website. But I apologize for a little bit long-winded there, but
all good, man.
All good. Nelson, did you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I mean, Grinnelli touched on it with the reusability. Part of why the F100 took a little bit longer than we would probably like was another one of the reasons, other than what art is Grinnelli was lamenting about. But we spent quite a lot of time making lots of things in the plane reusable. So if we did come to do another aircraft, I don't know, say an F105 or something, we have a hydraulic system written in a way so that you can basically just pick up parts and assemble the hydraulic system, and it will, like the hydraulic systems themselves are different. Like there's different actuators, different accumulators and stuff, but the actual code that's written allows you to just pick up all the parts and assemble it in a way that it matches the plane that you're flying. So, it might have 2 loops or 3 loops or whatever. You can put all that in, and it only takes a couple of minutes. And it's just a case of tuning it and making sure it works, which is much faster than designing a specific system each time for that process. And we have a couple of things like that, like RWR, electrical system, hydraulics, probably some others I'm forgetting about, gyros, that kind of thing. So they're all things which are common between aircraft. They're not exactly the same, but they have tunable parameters that make it much easier to produce it later on in another aircraft where it's slightly different.
Yeah, I heard a couple minutes. So, so you can switch from the F100 to F105. And I have the F105G on my Christmas list. So, Nelson, I appreciate it.
A couple of minutes, yeah, for some things, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
Rob is that procurement official who was always telling Sunshine and I, yeah, you'll have it by December.
As Grinnelli said, though, he already covered us with the art, so the art's going to take a long time. So.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
well,
we got to write a radar and stuff for that. So.
Yeah, guys, I really appreciate your time. Shine, Rob, any last comments or thoughts?
I am just absolutely impressed by the level of digital granularity of how accurate this thing is going to be. I had no clue. So thanks for taking me to school, Nelson and Joe. Just appreciate it.
And guys, I'm just excited that you are, for posterity, documenting, putting this together, and bringing it to folks like myself who are learning and experiencing these aircraft in a way, as Roger and I were talking about with the force feedback stick. It's amazing. And it's not, when I was a kid, I used to build the models. I used to, get to understand the aircraft based on the landing gear door shape. And now I get to see it in a different light, and it's a lot of fun. So thank you guys, because I think you're impacting, you're documenting for posterity, and you're impacting what people understand, and you're educating them. So thank you for that.
Well, we appreciate that very much.
Yeah. It's partly selfish as well, because as Grinnelli said, we're both players through and through, so we do love the end product as well. So, but yeah, no, it's good fun.
Well, for one, I can't wait to see it. And guys, I really appreciate your time. For you guys listening, stand by, because we will be back with more on the technical side with Shine and the historical side with me. And we'll give you updates from Grinnelli and Nelson as this comes to fruition. So it's been great talking, and we'll talk to everyone soon.